Friends, good
So,
evening. Welcome to this October installment of the Virtual Book Club. My name is Reverend Hillary Taylor. I am the Executive Director of South Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Our mission is to abolish the death penalty and catalyze criminal justice reform here in South Carolina. We partner with an organization called the South Carolina Christian Action Council. Their mission is to do Christian action every day here in South Carolina. Before we go any further, I want to make sure that all of you have brought your favorite beverage to this event tonight. I am once again bringing water, but I have a sandpiper on my Tervis tumbler. It's probably the bird that I would be if I was any bird. So fun thing. And Sister Helen, I'm gonna introduce you in a quick moment. I saw that you had your favorite beverage as well.
yes, water, but when I drink it, it turns to wine.
Amen. Very good.
It's a gift of the Holy Spirit. Not many know
May we all, ascend.
vibe.
May we all achieve. Oh gosh, what's that word that the Orthodox love? I can't remember. I'm for our Orthodox friends. I'm sure you're going to be shaking your fist at me later. But may we all ascend into such a place of holiness. Very quickly, what I'm going to do is share with you kind of the outline of what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to introduce our featured speaker. I'm going to ask her a couple of questions, and then I will turn it over to y'all because it is rare that we have such access to somebody who is this prominent in our movement. And I know that everybody is theosis. That's the word. Yes. Thank you, Karsten. I know I can always count on you. Yes.
What's the word, theosis?
Theosis. Yeah.
Just a theosis, y'all.
There you go. Friends, without further ado, let me give a brief introduction of our featured speaker for tonight's book club. Of course, we had Dead Man Walking as our feature for this month. And tonight we have Sister Helen Prejean, who is part of the Congregation of St. Joseph. She is the author of Dead Man Walking, as well as The Death of Innocence and River of Fire. This seminal work, Dead Man Walking, has been turned into an Academy Award-winning film starring Susan Sarandon and Sean Penn, and it's recently been modified for the Met Opera, which just finished running it, and it was a beautiful, moving performance. She is a deeply intersectional person, a teacher, and she is credited with helping to move the Roman Catholic Church's position on the death penalty to one that is seeking abolition. Without further ado, Sister Helen, welcome to the Virtual Book Club.
I got to tell you, there's nobody I'd rather be with than people on the ground working. The best definition of justice is just us. So I think your first question was what's going on in Louisiana.
Yes, I'm very interested. I obviously know a lot about what's going on as a state.
I would like to talk about what's going on in Louisiana.
Yeah.
So for 17 years, we have not had an execution in Louisiana. In the 80s, in 6 weeks, we executed 6 people. What was the political rhetoric that happened in the 60s? And make no mistake about it, it is politics that infuses 95% of the narrative or the rationale for the death penalty. It's not spoken that much, but it's driven by politicians who claim to be tough on crime, and they hit a public that's made to be afraid of evil people. It always entails demonizing people who have done a crime, which we tend to do by our penal system anyway. Our whole thing about the penal system is punish people, use violence against them in punishment. It's the only language they understand because they're inherently violent, bad people. And the image of God in all of this, especially the death penalty, is Punisher in Chief. What does God do? When you fail, you're punished. Adam and Eve sinned, punished. Punishment. That is the main, it's our metaphor, it's our way of approaching people who make a mistake. Plus, add it to individualism in the United States. And the individualism is, and it's that person's fault. Like in Europe, they always ask the we question, the community question. What went wrong that that person went with a gun and killed a whole community of people? It's the individualism and the blaming of the individual when they do something wrong. So we never look at root causes. Is anybody surprised that where the violence mainly happens in our society is where people don't have jobs? They've had a terrible education. They can't join the mainstream of the current of the river of society, and they do crimes. Anybody see those connections?
Yeah,
One of the things, one of the
Hillary's thing.
Oh, right. I signed up for
Sorry, just
That's all right.
muted somebody. It's okay.
Life happened. Poor baby, you got muted. I bet you were going to say something good. We'll get you later. But what makes all this possible, like now, Louisiana, after 17 years, here you have a person who ran for governor on the platform. I'm going to bring executions back. We haven't had executions. It's time to bring back hanging, firing squad, and electrocution. Bring them all back. We're going to, enough of this dilly-dallying around. And guess how this man, Jeff Landry, who was the Attorney General, framed it. Why he's seeking this. Can you guess what it is? Justice for those poor victims' families that have been waiting all these years for their justice. So the way that politicians try to frame it, to make it look legitimate, is that they're going to do this for the victim's family. And they hit people's vulnerabilities and also their tremendous lack of knowledge about how the death penalty works. You know, people don't understand how the criminal justice system works. Most people, law-abiding, they don't know unless they have some kind of direct experience in it. This is all made possible by the Supreme Court of the United States, which, when it put the death penalty back into practice again in the modern era in 76 in the Gregg v. Georgia decision, did two things. First of all, they gave as the criteria of when a state can decide to kill a citizen, we're only going to reserve it for the worst of the worst murders. Well, think of that a minute. So usually in state legislatures, in the statute, if you kill a policeman, that's worst of the worst. What if you kill a public school teacher? What if you kill a fireman? So when you get into these gradations and meritocracy for who deserves death that kills somebody, we're in an impossible field. We don't know what to do with it. It's tremendously hazy. And then notice what the Supreme Court did in Gregg. Then they coupled that with discretionary power of prosecutors to seek it or not. You will never have a death penalty unless you have a prosecutor who deliberately seeks death, because they can always plea bargain. They can always meet with the person before trial and come to a plea, what's called a plea bargain. We don't have to seek death. They never have to seek death. So you get to individual politicians that seek it. And the Supreme Court allowed for this. They had an opportunity as the Supreme Court of the United States to make a foundational rule against torture and cruelty by just simply recognizing in the Eighth Amendment that forbade cruel punishment, to recognize that when you put a human being in a cell for 15 or 20 years, then give them a designated date of death and bleed them out and kill them, that is cruel punishment. But they compartmentalize and they follow an ideology, and they have not recognized that, and they have left it up to the states. So South Carolina, Louisiana, the former slave states are the ones where you still have these pockets of killing. I'm going to do that for starters, and that's where we are, and that's where Louisiana is. But I'd love to get interaction from you. Is this how you see it? What do you understand about what's going on? So we can have real conversation, and then I'll get to the other questions.
Yeah, so others, if Sister Helen has asked for your interaction, so feel free to unmute yourself.
What do you think? Does that sound right to you? Do you think,
yeah, no, I mean, you're certainly preaching to the choir for me.
Well, so we're not talking to you mainly right now, because we're talking to them right now, because I want to hear from y'all, okay? Come on, what do you think?
I'm always ready to jump on in there. So Louisiana, and South Carolina. Does this infects the entire Southeast? Is it not? I know that Florida at one time was executing regularly, and I know Georgia has. I assume Mississippi does this. Is it?
No, and Florida under DeSantis is ready to rev it up again.
So what states other than the Deep South are really big on pushing forward with the death penalty? Is there any other part of the country that
no states
so bad?
No states other than the former slave states really push for the death penalty.
What about Oklahoma?
Oklahoma's a former slave state.
Okay.
Not only that, but you had the whole thing of native people that they oppressed and against those people, you know. So we see the pattern. In fact, look at it. Over 70% of all actual executions, though a lot of states had it on the books, actual executions have gone on in the former slave states. Over 70%. And you have a huge number of African American people, and it's a direct legacy of slavery. Because what are the plantation owners going to do when the slaves were freed? How are they going to get people to work on the land? What are they going to do? So what they did was set up a penal system so that if Black people loitered, they'd throw them in jail. They served their time in jail. Then they'd say, but you owe for lodging and you owe for food, and put them in convict work teams. Our penitentiary, Louisiana State Penitentiary, is still called Angola. It is 18,000 acres, and the labor the prisoners do for 2.5 cents an hour when they get to Angola is just like slave labor. And I've been reflecting more and more on Albert Camus. I don't know if y'all are familiar with his reflections on the guillotine, where he actually said a person under a death penalty is like a package, not in control of his life at all, not control of his body. We move you here, we do this, we change the method of execution, we do what we want with you. And where else did we ever have that but in slavery, of that complete command of a person's body and their life? So here we go for starters. So
you're completely correct.
Okay.
I'd love to argue with you, but I cannot.
Well, you don't want to argue with me. We don't want to spend our time arguing. We got to figure out how we're going to end this thing.
So next question is: Do we talk to the governor? Who do we talk to? Do we talk to prosecutors?
Well, excuse me. Have y'all had any conversations about this at all? About what you're doing in South Carolina? Heck yeah, we talk to the governor. But you know what we got to do? I'm going to tell you about an event we had last night. We had a screening of Dead Man Walking, and Tim Robbins came in for it. We had a theater called Manship Theater in Baton Rouge. We had a screening of the film. We had Tim at the talkback talking about making the film. The film of Dead Man Walking plows the ground and opens up the conversation with people, because it brings you over to both sides of the suffering. Brings you into the victims' families, and then it brings you over to, here's close up what it means to kill a fellow human being. And then I have found over the 40 years of my working on this issue The hearts of the American people are good. They don't have any idea about how the death penalty works. They tend to believe political rhetoric when you have politicians saying things like, the only thing we can do to be sure this killer person who down in his DNA is a killer is that we need to take his life to be safe. And they tend to believe it because they don't know people. They tend to believe the demonizing of people, just like you hear Republicans demonizing blue cities. That's where all the violence is. When you don't really understand human beings and the complexity, you demonize things. And they tend to believe it. So my job is, because I'm a witness, I've been there, I've accompanied and witnessed 6 executions, and I've learned how to tell the story to get to people. And I found the heavy workhorses that have achieved the most change are the Book of Dead Man Walking, because people are silent and reading and they're not arguing. And the film opens them up. And now we have the art form of the opera, which on Saturday, live HD performance went to 70 countries of the world. It went into 49 states. How do you awaken good people with good hearts? You do it through story. You take them into it, into both sides. So I know that's what we got to do en masse in Louisiana over these next 4 years. We got to have massive educational programs with the people and a way of directly linking them in to action. For a lot of people, action, political action is a big thing. They've never done it before. They picture, we got to find a way that what you do when your conscience has been stirred and you come to consciousness is you join with other people and you begin to engage in strategic action. And we're going to have a meeting on November 2nd to lay out the plan for a 4-year campaign in Louisiana of how we're going to educate the people and how we're going to plug them in strategically to action. Where did we begin? Certainly not with the new governor who got in, but we got to start working with those individual legislatures. And we have examples. Virginia did it. Virginia had an on-the-ground program. They were actually knocking on doors of people in Virginia, talking to them about the death penalty. And they had a little printout. Did you know this about the death penalty in Virginia? And we're going to have that same thing. I mean, do people know that in Louisiana, for every year that we keep the death penalty in place, it costs $15 million more in the budget? And imagine if we put that into help, real help for victims, families. What does South Carolina do for victims of violence? Well, what does Louisiana do for victims of violence? You apply, there's a lot of red tape and there's a long wait, and the most you can get, at most, is $35,000. What could we be doing for the healing of our people? In 2022, we had 1,000 murders in Louisiana, 1,000. So you multiply that at minimally by 3, that's 3,000 families that had violence done. Where's the healing? When you're pouring it all into killing this particular person and keeping that machinery of death in place. So it's going to entail getting the whole fiscal thing and the cost, and that appeals to conservatives. You got more and more conservatives now that are saying, well, we're not for government interference, period. And are you telling me it's costing us millions and millions of dollars to kill a few people where we could be using the resources? And when we first started getting in these economic discussions, I went, man, is it going to be decided like on money? And then I found out that Martin Luther King had said, a budget is a moral document. Where we put our resources for death or for the life of the people is a moral document. So who wants to get in here? Including you, Hillary. We don't want you to be muted.
No, I am an attentive listener. I saw that Catherine Cottle had a raised hand, so I want to get back to Catherine.
Catherine.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay, I've never done a Zoom before.
that's all right.
And I had actually unraised my hand because I
You
should
had
just listen
unraised.
to you rather than, you know, I listen to myself all the time. So,
But no, but we listening to you, Catherine. And how do you
well,
understand? You just pull it down.
yeah, I had found out not all that long ago about the role of the Attorney General, in the death penalty situations. And I know in this state we had a recent, everyone's heard of the Murdaugh situation where a
Oh my
man
God, he's from South
deliberately
Carolina.
killed his wife and son and just all kind of financial stuff and all, and the death penalty was not sought for him. We have another young man in prison who went unarmed into a convenience store. The owner pulled a gun, they struggled over it, and the owner was shot. So this young man, with no intent to kill anyone,
Yeah,
was sentenced to the death penalty. So just the arbitrariness of it,
yeah, you got it.
was so frustrating.
Yeah, because look at the Murdoch family and all the money they have in the political
Yeah.
power.
And I'm sure that had nothing to do with it.
But see, a DA is not going to go with the reason you're never going to see a rich person on death row is a DA is going to think 50 times before you go after that person for the death penalty and maybe lose because that person's going to have a bank of crackerjack lawyers that are going to fight you every step of the way. It's going to prolong the trial and you might lose and you look bad. So you're not even going to take them on. Some poor guy, a poor person for the most part, gets involved in this and you go after them. It's only poor people that are sought for the death penalty.
Makes
So,
absolute
Catherine,
sense.
that's a good insight. Catherine, that's a good one.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody
Sister
else?
Helen, something that Hillary and I have discussed, so she kind of might be able to articulate it a little bit better if I'm not clear on it, but a theology that we have been hearing in South Carolina that is not something I heard when I was living in Atlanta or other places was and so Hillary can clarify it if I'm
Oh,
but
I want to hear your thoughts. Forget about Hillary. I
all
want
right.
to
She talks about this every day. But that, because God, the Father, had Jesus die on the cross, it was foretold, this is to fulfill scripture, that God the Father is okay with the death penalty. This is how redemption happens, is through the cross and through executions. And that was something that I have not heard before. But
you had never heard that. How did you feel? What theology did you get of how Jesus's death on the cross saved us? What did you heard?
I think I grew up with a lot of that was how, salvation happens, that this is necessary for our salvation. And I think I took time I hadn't applied it to the death penalty at all on my own. So I hadn't made that connection.
Okay.
But I've thought a lot about how like violence just is violence and is a fact of life, but it's not something that God would seek for God or for anyone for violence to be committed, and that it's a fact of the Roman Empire and a fact of lots of different empires.
I mean, what kind of father would seek the death of his own son because his sense of justice had been violated? What kind of father would do that? And so this is big time. That theology of the cross, I have actually heard people say when people were about to be executed, they're going to pay for their sins. Jesus died on the cross for us and expiated our sins. And so he's going to give his life. It's going to expiate his sins. And the image of God behind it is this is God, punisher in chief. This is what God desires. And that's the way you sanctify something. That's the way you take a human system of doing something and you justify it because you give it a religious meaning. You're on to a big thing there, and you've already worked it through. Good for you. And I bet Hillary agrees. Look at Hillary. She ain't adding one bit to it.
No, I mean,
But here she goes.
recently I was with a bunch of other pastors and Oh goodness, you know Sam Heath at Equal Justice USA. He loves sharing the story about the first time he met you. And he said, "Hi, my name is Sam, Sister Helen. I'm the evangelical organizer for EJUSA." And you said, "Oh, Sam, oh good, yes, evangelicals, they're the key." And so
Really true.
it's always
They
a
are part
great
of it
laugh
anyway.
whenever we hear that story.
Well, that's really true. I mean, the way religion's been used in a lot of ways. I mean, just look what right-wing people have done to deprive people of their civil rights using religion as the argument, you know. So with the death penalty, you don't have a lot of reflection. Like, look at us in the Catholic Church. Okay, now get this, y'all, because we move slowly, Catholic Church, right? 1,500 blooming years of dialogue to finally, in the church document of the Catholic Catechism, to change the wording that no matter how serious or grievous a crime, the state can never be allowed to take the life of its people. 1,500 years of dialogue. I was in there. There were a lot of people in there. Things don't change in a community without a lot of dialogue. I think of it like bubbles in a pot rising up from the ground, from people's experience, right? And where the Catholic Church kept being stuck, and it went back to St. Augustine, 5th century. You always have to look at context in which when doctrines come forth or moral teachings. Because for a long time we upheld slavery in the Catholic Church. Quoting St. Paul, slaves be obedient to masters. So all the white plantation owners that would go to church in Louisiana, they'd hear that. Be kind to your slaves, but basically it's all right because of this. And you get these proof texts from scripture. So that was big time with the death penalty and kept upholding Augustine in the 5th century. Look at the context. You had the Goths and the Visigoths and the Huns breaking down the gates of Rome and what was called the bearded ones, the barbarians, where Europe was in chaos. And it's the first time you had a leader, a faith leader in the church, St. Augustine, say, depart from the explicit gospel of Jesus, that the violent could be contained with the sword. First time, 5th century. But look at the context. Chaos, violence everywhere. And they didn't have prisons. They didn't have a way to contain violent people. But always the spirit of it was for the protection or self-defense of society. And notice what happened with the Supreme Court. When they put the death penalty back, they said there are some crimes by its very nature that only death can be a just punishment. And now, who are going to be the arbitrators of all this? Who's going to set up the legal system to determine this? Very human agents, as we're seeing with the politicians. So look, bump along, Augustine in the 5th century, St. Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century. Again, it was always to defend society. He said it's like you have a rabid dog in a neighborhood and it's biting people and people are dying. You put down the rabid dog, but to defend society, because they didn't have prisons. Bump along, century after century. And then the argument, well, when we have another way to protect society, we don't need to imitate the violence and kill people. So in the Catholic Church, we had a number of popes that began to raise this, and the bishops, because the people are raising it. In the Catholic Church, we got a new view of what the church meant. It was the biggest reform in the Catholic Church, Vatican II, like Martin Luther's Reformation. That, how do you define the church? Most people think it's the bishops or the higher. It's the people of God. So the people of God having these experiences. I'm one of them. Here I am, a nun that taught kids, didn't know anything about it. I start getting involved with people on death row. I start witnessing these executions. I'm talking to the guards, everybody participating in this. I'm one of the bubbles in the pot, and I start sharing my experience. But people were doing that all over the place. So then you come to the Pope John Paul II. And here was a connection. It's in my book, The Death of Innocence. The second story in this book is about a man in Virginia, Joseph Odell, who was innocent. And I was his spiritual director. And the people in Italy got involved in Joseph Odell's case. The governor couldn't wait for Joseph to be executed. He got 10,000 faxes from the people of Italy. Do not kill Joseph Odell. He couldn't wait to kill Joseph. And the Italian Parliament sent a delegation over to Virginia for Joseph Odell. They looked into his case. They found all this stuff. And they couldn't believe that this man was going to be executed. And in the end, he was. But that's how I got contact with Pope John Paul II. And the key thing in my conversation with him, my dialogue with him was, Your Holiness, I meet all these Catholics who say they're pro-life, but they draw a line. They're pro-innocent life, but not for the guilty. So they make a distinction. Somebody guilty, yeah, they deserve the death penalty. Can you help our church? To be pro-life truly means to be for the inviolable dignity of life. Even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that should not be taken from him. And then I just brought him into an execution. I said, he's shackled hand and foot, surrounded by 6 guards, and he's saying, Sister, please pray God holds up my legs as I make this walk. Your Holiness, where is the dignity in taking a human being, rendering them completely defenseless, and then killing them? Can you help our church? Dignity of all life. Pro-life is not just innocent life, and especially when you get to the gospel of Jesus. The last being first, and the marginated, the outcast, especially when you get to the gospel of Jesus. This is at the heart of what the gospel message is. So Pope John Paul, figurative terms here, my metaphor, he set the volleyball up over the net. Pope Francis came along and in 2018, knocked the volleyball over the net, changed the catechism, but the dialogue had been building. And that's what we're about. It's dialogue with the people, because the people have these ideas about the death penalty, but they're good people. They have good hearts. So we got to find a creative way to get to them. And then we have to plan the strategies to plug them into strategic action so they can have a role in helping South Carolina in this thing. Interaction. What you think? Questions, comments?
Danielle has her hand up.
Sister Helen, many of the conservative Christians that I've had conversations with about the death penalty use the argument eye for an eye. And that's how they kind of abdicate personal responsibility in all of this. They say, well, this is the rule for an eye. And when you talk about conversations with common people, how do you best counter this argument that is so common among the people that we really wish to change their hearts and minds?
Right. Well, this is what I call surface soul stuff. An eye for an eye. I've been with audiences and I said, hey, what's your favorite quote that you pull out to be from the Bible to be for the death penalty? And they'll all say in chorus, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for life. They killed, we kill them. And then you get to Jesus. What do you make of Jesus's words now? You have heard it said, an eye for an eye. So what happens to Jesus in this? You only gonna go with this quote? What about Jesus? What is the whole thrust of what Jesus has taught us about mercy and God's compassionate mercy for us? What if somebody applied that to us? What if we applied it to our children? And actually, when you do a little exegesis on that part of the scriptures, it was actually a step to contain the violence. Because say if Pamela in one village, she did something to Natalie's village and somebody was hurt, they would go and kill the whole village. Just wipe everybody out. That's what you do. You wipe out the enemy. So only an eye for an eye, only one life for life. You can't wipe out the, and it was a step where you don't have prisons now. You don't have a criminal justice system to contain violence, actually, when you look at it. But then you want to get behind that of the person who's quoting that and just say, well, what is your own belief, personal belief in the following of Jesus, when he says about loving your enemy. And then there's nothing like good examples of people who do it, who actually live it. And those victims' families that have endured that violence and choose not to evoke that same violence on the one who killed their loved one. The living witnesses around us. It is important in our work that we raise up their voices as well. In Dead Man Walking, the hero of the book is Lloyd LeBlanc. His son David was killed by Pat Sonnier and his brother, the first story in Dead Man Walking. And this man who loved his son, he and David used to fix cars together. I mean, they were close. And David goes to a football game one night in November. In fact, we're getting to the anniversary of the death, November 4th. And the next time that Lloyd LeBlanc sees him is in the morgue to identify his dead son. The anger in him almost killed him. The anger, the grief, the trauma. And he noticed what was happening to him. And he invited me to come pray with him in this little chapel. I would go, and Lloyd LeBlanc and I would pray together in this little chapel. And it was a journey, a spiritual journey, really, for his very soul, because he said, I'm losing who I am. I'm yelling at my wife. We almost lost her from grief when we lost David. We had to change his grave close to the house because my wife can't get through a day without visiting David's grave. And here I am yelling at her because I'm in this anger all the time. And he prayed and he prayed and he prayed, Jesus, you got to help me. And then when he had his moment of revelation, the way he described it to me, and I put it in the book, it is big in the book. And he said, it was consuming me and I was losing who I was. And then he put his hand out like this and he said, They killed my boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. I mean, one victim family one time described it as, I'm drinking poison and I hope it kills him. So what do you do with that anger? And community and healing is crucial in that you have people who pray with you, you have people who are supporting you, and not saying, oh, you shouldn't be angry, or one callous, out of touch minister. Here these people, violence just happened, and the minister saying to them, the words of Jesus are, well, somewhere down the road, you're going to have to forgive. Preaching to them what they need to do how dare we do that? We accompany people. But with Lloyd LeBlanc, and if you even look at the word forgive, it means to give over before. F-O-R-E, forgive, give before, which means you turn over all that anger that I want to get even. And when he was released from that, Lloyd LeBlanc was the only one in the town that visited Pat and Eddie Sonnier's mother, where she had people throwing dead animals on her porch, and the anger of the community thrust on her, so the poor lady wouldn't even go to the store to get groceries. And he shows up at her front door because he's been released from that anger. Forgive, he's given it over. And he brings her a basket of fruit and he says, Miss Sonnier, you need anything, you call me. And we see the transformation of an ordinary human being who lost his son. So we need the witnesses to be the ones to testify. And so as we go to the public and as we have this conversation, want those witnesses. We want those exonerated people who were put and condemned to death in South Carolina, and they made a mistake. We want their witness to the people. We go, how could this happen? And they come to learn the system that we've set in place and just how broken it is. Anybody else want to say something?
We've got Noah and Laura who've raised their hand.
Hi, Sister Helen. I'm Noah.
Hi.
Meet you. So yeah, a few of us on the call went to seminary together, and our seminary had a program where you could be a chaplain out of prison as part of your contextual education. So I did that for 3 years and was kind of serving at a women's prison. And a lot of my colleagues have continued in the kind of social justice, criminal justice vein, and have kind of become a prison abolitionist in a way.
Yeah.
And I don't really know what my take on it is, because I've only had the experience of that one system. And I kind of, when you were talking about some of the things that had happened in the early church when they were trying to protect the community and there were no prisons, it kind of just sparked it sparked the thought in my mind. So I was just kind of curious what your thoughts were on that. I'd love to know.
On what? Thoughts on what? I thought I gave you my thoughts. What thoughts?
On abolition, like on prison abolition.
Oh, yeah. What we got to do, restorative justice is the road for us, for our own sake. We can't continue to be on this path of punishing people and depriving them of their humanity. I mean, education in prisons, nil. And we know that human beings grow through education. I mean, it's got to be a place where human beings, you know what the warden at the Louisiana State Penitentiary said to me one time? We got a tough prison. He said, sister, I'm going to tell you, most of the people who come in here who murdered somebody did not know when they got up that morning they were going to be murdering somebody. They got in this situation, they had a gun. They get here, they have the discipline of the prison. They change. Human beings change. But you see that image being sealed in their minds where they've been demonized, and these people are just as soon kill you as look at you. And then, God forbid, if somebody gets out on parole and happens to commit violence, and then you have that whole thing there of human beings make mistakes. And we know that, but see, our lives are privileged. And we have resources in our life, starting with our education. Not just starting with it. We're privileged. We're resourced. I mean, I've never robbed anybody for drugs or broken the law. I get speeding tickets, I do. But I mean, other than that, and why is it that we don't commit crimes, huh? Is it because we're so special? We're morally just superior, so we don't commit crimes, right? Look at the resources in our lives. And then when you look into the lives, 90% of people who end up on death row had violence done to them as children, witnessed violence in the household, and were abused as children. 90%. And they come out of that context, then they do violence, they act out of what they know and have seen. So we got a lot of restorative justice to do. First of all, we're just beginning. Like, do you have alternative drug courts in South Carolina? Do you have that? Instead of sending kids to prison for drugs, it's an alternative. We
do have one, I believe, in Greenville County, but they're not statewide for sure.
Well, it's a start, but and now there's a saying, and we need to really help people understand this, to be smart about crime, not tough on crime. That tough on crime thing was throw them away for long, long sentences. I mean, it's been terrible. We have young people given life sentences here in Louisiana. It was their first offense and it was nonviolent, and they threw them away forever. So the more you get into it, I know at times you feel like a little bitty Rolade in a great big stomach, Noah. But this is the gospel. And this is the call. And then we watch where people have succeeded, where you have progressive DAs that come in. Where's that happening in South Carolina? Where are the lights? Where's the movement in South Carolina? And how can the group be part of that?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Galen, you may be our last question, so go on ahead.
Okay. Sister Helen, in 1976, I was living in New York City. I was 27 years old, and I got called to serve on a jury for a capital murder case. And the policeman was not murdered, but there was an attempted murder. And I was scared because this crime had taken place less than a mile from where I lived. And I was scared. I was 27 years old, and I all these kind of people. Well, not only that, did I vote for conviction, I talked everybody else in the jury into it.
Well, what was the evidence? Conviction?
I had a terrible lawyer. The lawyer didn't even know the facts. Looking back, it's just horrible what happened. But years later, I saw a dead man walking and totally changed my life and opinion about it. And now I'm a big trying to do everything I can in South Carolina to
good for you.
help.
There had to be something brewing in you. It had to be brewing in you all along, Galen.
Well, I'm a social worker, so I mean, I've got a bleeding heart, but at the time, I was just scared. And
I guess I can understand that.
And in truth, they have not had any executions. So I think I never did find out what the sentence was because I was afraid to.
Well, it was attempted, and so I don't think they could have given him the death penalty for that.
No, that was the charge. We had an excellent judge who explained how to discuss
what was the charge? Attempted murder, or what was the sentence for attempted murder in New York in 70, whatever it was?
Well, we didn't find out what the sentencing was a separate event. So, and I was scared to find out because then I got feeling really responsible and like recriminations, and his family would come and get me. And I mean, your mind goes all kinds of places. It's a lot of responsibility, but they never did execute, and they haven't executed anybody in New York for a long time.
I know about New York, y'all. I know about Pataki, good Catholic governor who needed an edge, brought the death penalty back to New York for 10 years. You spent millions of dollars. You had a few people on death row. Finally, they overturned it because it was unconstitutional the way the statute was written. I know about New York.
Well, I've moved to South Carolina, so I've got new territory.
Yeah, you do. And there's a lot of good work to be done with the people of South Carolina. The people are good. People are good. Our job is to bring them close to the reality and educate them. And at first it may look like it's overwhelming, but that's what we do. Use the film to open up hearts. Use the book, even if a group reads the first 4 chapters. It takes you through the Pat Sonnier story. Because, see, they're never going to have a way to get close to executions. There've been 2 court cases trying to make executions public. It's a secret ritual. You want to know why I'm happy about the opera? It's because it brings people close.
I saw the opera on Saturday. There were all 12 of us in the audience, and
isn't it something?
I'm a long-term opera fan, and I mean, it really moved me. I was crying and was laughing. There's some funny stuff in it too, but
that helps. But I mean, it's the only opera in the world where there's a minute and a half of silence. So you have to attend when they're killing him, to putting the needle in. It's all silence. There's no music. There's no nothing. And then you hear the beating of your own heart, your own conscience, and you watch the death. And you know he's guilty. You've watched him murder somebody. And maybe in the beginning, in the journey of the audience, it's, well, he deserves it. Bring it on. If anybody deserves it, he did. He killed that innocent young girl. But we're all on a journey, aren't we, spiritually, of growing and understanding. And that's God's spirit work in our hearts and in communities. See, you can't make it through without community like us coming together.
I am gonna, Sister Pam, you are one of our board members, and you're also a valued Catholic who is a part of our movement in South Carolina. I wanted to make space for you to say anything to Sister Helen, if you wanted to.
Yes.
Well, I don't know that Hillary has bragged about herself, but she's been a very effective leader of South Carolinians for alternatives to the death penalty. And a number of the things you've talked about, like showing films. We had 83 Days, the story of the 14-year-old who was electrocuted in South Carolina in 1944. We had our press conference on the steps of the state capitol this month and petition to the governor and so on. But there, and then the Palmetto Journey of Hope. But when you were talking about having people encounter somebody who had been on death row and was free, he wasn't exonerated, but he's now a minister. And he was giving testimony up in Spartanburg. Hillary, I was so impressed with him. And I think he's going to come visit me when he comes to Hilton Head. But I don't know how to say to the sisters, oh, by the way, this guy killed somebody when he was young, but he's a minister now. So, because as Sister Helen says, not all our Catholics and not even all our religious sisters quite understand a lot of the stuff about the death penalty, and anyway, I'm just grateful to see you on the screen and hear you after so many years of having Sister Helen Prejean invoked as the name.
Yeah, whatever that means.
Very much. Yeah, that's good. Thank you for the work you've done, and thank you for the influence that you've been able to wield.
Gotta do it. Gotta do it. Can't not do it. From what I know, I can't not do it. And a lot of people, because I'm a D4 and they go, where do you get your energy? I mean, when it's a wave like this, with this energy in it, you get replenished as you go. And that's a sure sign that we're doing what God wants us to do. The energy is replenished. And when our balloons start hitting the ceiling, we go, I don't know, we got a boring feeling, or we just, but boy, when that energy sparks, as hard as the task is, we're going to get in there with other people. Community is the answer. And so you can have somebody like Hillary to work with and each other. And you're going to find a creative way. You're going to find a creative way. Well,
I've got one more question for you, if that's okay, Sister Helen. And then we're going to go into some brief announcements about how you can become more proximate with SCADP. A lot has happened since you published this book. Lots of different court decisions that bar the executions of youth, juveniles, things, a court case that bars the execution of people with intellectual disabilities, a court case that bars the life without parole sentence for juveniles. So it's exciting to see all of that. I'm wondering if now that you've been, sort of sitting with this thing you published, this thing that has been reinterpreted in lots of different art forms, is there anything that you would have changed about the book? Or if you could wave a magic wand and go and change it now, what would you change?
No, nothing, because I had a great editor at Random House. If I hadn't had Jason Epstein as my editor, you never would have heard of Dead Man Walking. Because the way when I sent him the first draft of the book, I spent so much time in the early part of the story about the human rights of the person about to be executed. And Jason read it and he said, nobody's going to read your book. And it doesn't help that you're none either, because they go, oh, well, she believes in Jesus and forgiveness. And you wait far too long in this story to talk about the crime. 2 innocent teenage kids were killed. And what's your own response? Where's your own outrage at that? And if you don't put that crime in of what this man, Pat Sonnier, and his brother did, of the killing of those 2 innocent kids, and the outrage you feel about that, and the feeling for those parents, nobody's going to read your book. And just being with Tim Robbins last night, where we screened Dead Man Walking, And he said, that's what got me in the book. It was just like you got these two opposing things. Here are the suffering victims. And then on the other hand, here's the person that did this, and here's the state that wants to go through this protocol of step by step killing him. And you got to bring your reader over into both of those arenas of suffering. And he said it was the easiest screenplay I ever wrote. And that's, if you see in Dead Man Walking, he ends the film with seeing Matthew Poncelet executed. And everybody on the editing committee was saying to him, in the movie there, in the film there, because Matthew Poncelet's been through his journey, he's confessed, he asked forgiveness of the victim's family. And they said to him, and you have the audience, end it there. And he said, I don't want to have the audience. And if you see the ending of Dead Man Walking, there's Matthew Poncelet, it's been through his own journey, he's been executed, juxtaposed with him in the woods, participating in the rape and murder of an innocent victim. And the audience is left with both of those scenes juxtaposed. And the theater managers told him they had never shown a film where everybody stayed seated. Credits ran on the screen till finally it was silent and people filed out in silence because they were thinking, because that's the struggle in our own hearts. Look at these terrible things that people do. Don't they deserve to die for that? That's in our own hearts. And that's what we have to explore. Yeah. Well, what happens in the process when we say, okay, we're going to put ourselves in charge in selecting the worst of these murders, and we're going to have the state kill the people. Where else? Maybe I'll end with this. Where else in the criminal justice system do we ever let the imitation of the crime be the way that we deal with what a person has done? I mean, if a person's put in prison for arson, you go burn his house. Somebody who's in for rape, you got a rape squad every Friday and you rape him. You imitate using the crime itself to determine the punishment. It makes us that. We become that.
I appreciate the ways that folks like yourself have emphasized that pain that is not transformed is transferred, and that violence, begets violence, which, is something that people have been saying for a long time. But so often people have pitted victims advocates and anti-death penalty activists against each other. But really, everybody's a victim in this. And so thank you for all the work you've done.
Gotta do it. Yeah, and you too. Thank you for the work you can be doing and do in South Carolina.
Well, and perhaps one day we'll invite you. I don't know how often you come to South Carolina, but we do have some lovely things. The death penalty is an unfortunate part of our history and our present, but there are lovely things we would love to invite you to and to eat. I don't know what are you a vegetarian? Are you?
No, I'm Cajun. I eat everything. I'm an omnivore.
Gotcha. So we'll shrimp and grits for certain, and maybe some other delicacies around here.
Well, look, y'all will be the treat. I got to tell you that. Maybe some nice food's always good, but if I can come, y'all will be the treat. It will be great to be with.
Well, thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah. Very quickly before we log off, I know it's a minute past the hour, but if you are interested in connecting with us, go to www.scadp.org, where you can find out more about pen pal programs that we have. Some of you are already pen pals in this Zoominar. Some of you I need to get back to because you have signed up to be pen pals. There are other ways that you can engage with different educational activities, both virtually and in person. It is very possible that executions may restart in South Carolina. So in the event of that happening, we will definitely be posting petitions. You can sign up for our newsletter. That's the easiest way for you to stay connected to everything that we are doing. Every first Tuesday, I have an introduction meeting to all the things we are doing in South Carolina. And every third Tuesday, I have a deeper kind of conversation about different kinds of community organizing efforts that you can be a part of, whether it is writing letters to local newspapers, whether it is helping us figure out strategic connections within our legislatures, or networking with other groups across South Carolina that are interested in criminal legal reform and also restorative justice. You name it, we want you to be a part of it. Finally, we have one more virtual book club. Sister Helen mentioned restorative justice is the way forward. Whether you believe in abolition, and some of you may not be there yet, some of you may say, how about reform, criminal legal reform? Wherever you are on your journey, I hope that you will join us for next month. I'm going to share my screen very briefly to show you our selection. We will be looking at The Little Book of Restorative Justice by Howard Zehr. You can now see what this looks like. It is a nice little thin book, very easy to read. November 16th at 7 p.m. we'll be covering it. Go to www.scadp.org/virtual book club for that. And also we'll be coming out with a roster of next year's virtual book club selections with our partners at the South Carolina Christian Action Council. So with that, my friends, I am grateful that you came tonight. Sister Helen, thank you for your presence and your work and your inspiration. We are grateful to be in this work with you and solving the problem of the death penalty in the U.S. And we'll stop recording.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. I loved being with you.
Thank you, sister.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.